This is the Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life.
Today, we are deep diving into a case that really fundamentally redefined what it means to be a family in America. Obergefell v. Hodges from 2015.
And we're going to start not with a constitutional clause, but with the immediate crisis facing thousands and thousands of people back in 2015.
Right.
Imagine you've built a whole life, you have children, shared property, a lifetime commitment.
Everything.
And the moment you drive across a state border, the state legally just relegates you to the status of strangers.
The human stakes were just so profound, so immediate. We're talking about the right to define your own family, the legal status of your children, and really the simple, fundamental dignity of having your deepest commitment recognized by the law.
Exactly. This case brought together 14 same-sex couples and 2 widowers who were challenging laws in 4 states: Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee.
And what were those laws doing?
Those states either banned same-sex marriage outright or, and this is critical, they refused to recognize legal marriages that were performed in other jurisdictions.
So that brings us to the core outcome, the one sentence that really summarizes the seismic shift of 2015.
The Supreme Court held that the 14th Amendment requires states both to license same-sex marriages and to recognize same-sex marriages lawfully performed in any other jurisdiction.
That one ruling.
It just instantaneously transformed the legal and social reality for millions of Americans. It provided uniformity and recognition where before there had just been, chaos and contradiction.
And our mission today is to really get into the story of the people who forced this reckoning, the true nature of the constitutional conflict they face, and the foundational logic the Supreme Court used to justify such a huge national change.
Okay, so let's unpack the chaos, the world before this decision.
Right. So if you were legally married in, say, New York, and then you moved to a state that refused to recognize that union, every single right tied to marriage, visitation during medical emergencies, property rights, the ability to file joint taxes, inheriting without massive penalties, all of it just vanished. It wasn't just symbolic, it was practical, day-to-day legal jeopardy.
And the most resonant human story, the one that really anchors the entire case, involves James Obergefell and John Arthur in Ohio.
Such a powerful story.
Arthur was terminally ill with ALS. They flew to Maryland to be lawfully married, actually on the tarmac of a small airport, knowing their time together was so limited.
It was literally a race against the clock just to solidify their legal standing.
Precisely. And after Arthur's death, the state of Ohio refused to list James Obergefell as the surviving spouse on the death certificate.
I mean, just think about the magnitude of that.
At the moment of your deepest grief, the state is actively denying the reality of your union. It was a formal administrative act of profound stigma. And the Supreme Court later really focused on that, the government using its power to erase a family.
And the harm wasn't just limited to widowers or dying spouses. The case also spotlighted the really precarious position of children.
Look at the story of April DeBoer and Jane Roe in Michigan.
They were raising 4 adopted children, but because of Michigan's marriage laws, they couldn't jointly adopt them. The law restricted adoption to married couples or single individuals.
So that meant their 4 kids were legally tied to one parent, but not the other. It put their whole family unit in this state of perpetual, uncertain legal status.
And what's so crucial here is recognizing that the law was explicitly, and you could say unnecessarily, harming the children by creating this instability.
Right. If the primary legal parent died,
the other parent had no automatic rights to the kids they had raised together for years.
This systemic denial of everyday rights wasn't just about these huge life events either.
No, not at all. You also had petitioners like A.C. Deco and Thomas Costura. They were lawfully married in New York. When they moved to Tennessee for a job, their marriage was just deemed non-marital.
So what did that mean for them practically? It meant they lost access to basic spousal benefits through work. They faced legal uncertainty around even just modest property holdings, all the little things you take for granted.
So the petitioners, they initially found success in federal district courts, which saw the injustice. But then the legal conflict got very real. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals consolidated these cases and reversed all those lower court rulings.
And that Sixth Circuit ruling was the major legal hurdle. They essentially argued that marriage, historically, was an institution left entirely to the states.
So not a federal issue.
Right. And that the Constitution, specifically the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses, did not contain a right to same-sex marriage, because that right just lacked deep historical roots in American tradition.
In other words, the Sixth Circuit said, we feel for these couples, but it's not the Supreme Court's job to define marriage. That's up to state legislatures and voters.
And that's what forced the core constitutional puzzle directly to the highest court. Did the 14th Amendment compel states to change their definition of marriage?
Exactly. That set the stage. They had to decide if the 14th Amendment's guarantee of liberty and fairness demanded two things. First, that states must issue licenses to same-sex couples, and second, that states must recognize licenses from other states.
Let's get into the foundational logic here because it's so important. The court relied heavily on the Due Process Clause, which protects fundamental liberty.
Okay, so how did the court elevate marriage, which had always been treated as more a state-regulated contract, to a fundamental liberty that the government can't restrict based on sex?
The court made this really powerful argument that the right to marry is inherent in the concept of personal autonomy.
Autonomy.
Yeah. It's about the ability of individuals to define their own destiny, their life choices, their self-expression. When the government restricts that choice for an entire class of people, it is restricting their most basic self-determination. And that is, by definition, denying liberty.
And what's so fascinating is that the court didn't just issue some blanket statement. They carefully articulated why marriage is so fundamental. They identified these four interconnected principles, what you could call the four pillars of marriage for everyone.
Right. The first pillar is personal choice and autonomy. This is the idea that marriage is fundamental because it involves the most personal of choices, who you will commit your life to, and the state just cannot usurp that.
And if we connect that back to the human story, this is exactly why the Ohio law was unconstitutional, by refusing to acknowledge James Obergefell and John Arthur's decision to marry.
The state was violating their right to define their own lives and destinies, even at the point of death. Absolutely.
So what's the second pillar?
The second pillar is the enduring union. The court recognized that marriage sustains a two-person bond of unique importance for a person's identity and security. Denying same-sex couples this recognition denies them that specific kind of spiritual and legal fulfillment.
And the third pillar brings us right back to the kids.
The relationship to family and children. The court saw that marriage is linked to child rearing and the security of families. Denying it created instability and inflicted stigma on the children of same-sex couples. This pillar directly supported the claim of April DeBoer and Jane Roe. The state's action was actively harming children.
And the last word.
Finally, the fourth pillar, the social keystone. The court recognized that marriage is central to our country's social order. It provides access to a huge network of civil and social benefits, everything from joint health insurance to Social Security. Denying same-sex couples access to this keystone relegated them to second-class status.
So by identifying these four pillars, the court established that marriage is fundamentally about protecting individual liberty and dignity, regardless of who you are. And this wasn't just created out of thin air. It was built on precedent.
Correct. The court explicitly tied this ruling to prior landmark civil rights cases. They cited Loving v. Virginia, which struck down state bans on interracial marriage, showing that the scope of marriage had already evolved past historical restrictions. They also relied on United States v. Windsor, which had already affirmed federal recognition of same-sex marriages.
So the message was clear. The constitutional understanding of liberty and marriage isn't static. It unfolds over time to reveal injustices.
Which leads us directly to the second constitutional leg the ruling stands on, the Equal Protection Clause.
The fairness argument.
Exactly. If due process provides the foundation for the right, equal protection provides the fairness argument.
So what does that fairness argument look like in practice here?
It means the government cannot treat two groups of similarly situated people differently without an extremely compelling reason. Excluding same-sex couples from the institution of marriage imposes a profound stigma and injury that the Equal Protection Clause just forbids.
States have to treat same-sex couples as worthy of the same rights.
Yes. Because there is no legitimate reason, no compelling government interest to deny them this fundamental liberty.
Now, this is where we have to acknowledge the deep controversy and the legal gravity of what the Sixth Circuit had ruled before. I mean, the sources are clear that historical traditions restricted marriage to opposite-sex couples for centuries. That tradition was the central argument for the states.
And that's absolutely vital context.
Yeah.
Reasonable people still disagree today about how much weight tradition should carry when we interpret fundamental rights.
Right.
The court, in this case, effectively stated that while history informs our understanding, it cannot be used to justify excluding a whole class of people from a fundamental right simply because our moral and social understanding of liberty and equality has expanded.
So tradition cannot be an excuse for inequality when fundamental rights are on the line.
That's the takeaway. The final result ensured that the chaotic, fragmented legal world where your marriage could vanish at a state line was finally unified. And the immediate practical impact was profound. Millions of same-sex couples instantly accessed comprehensive federal and state protections, ensuring stability for their families, especially with things like healthcare and property.
This deep dive really shows us that this decision wasn't about creating something new out of whole cloth. The court was recognizing the dignity, the fulfillment, and the commitment that was already present in these unions. It was affirming that marriage is central to the human condition for everyone.
And that profound legal and social change stemmed from the court's willingness to revisit the concept of liberty and realize that, constitutional meaning unfolds over time to correct historical injustices and protect autonomy.
So we end on the final so what? This ruling fundamentally changed the lives of millions in 2015 by affirming the link between personal stories and constitutional law. But the court grounded the decision in this idea of an evolving understanding of liberty and equality.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. If the court's emphasis on personal autonomy, dignity, and revealing injustices in long-standing legal structures was powerful enough to guarantee marriage equality nationwide,
Right.
what does that evolving constitutional standard mean for other relationship structures, like polyamory or legally recognized familial relationships outside of the traditional two-person unit, as society's understanding of identity and commitment continues to shift and expand?
A truly profound link between history, law, and the ongoing struggle for recognition. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Obergefell v. Hodges. We hope you walk away feeling informed and thoughtful about how the Constitution protects the most personal aspects of your life.
You've been listening to The Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com. This is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next case.